you. It's a warm feeling. It's a fuzzy wuzzy. Okay. So from now on, if you can, I'm not going to pressure you, but from now on, each day, send a compliment. Call somebody you cared about or who you care about and just send a little message because you could change somebody's day. So that's why I do that. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go on to our first presentation of the conference. She's from the Ontario College of Teachers. I am proud to say that I am a member of OCT, and I've been a member since 2015, I do believe. Yay! And I get to say that I've taught in the First Nation community as well. I'm a facilitator. I don't think I even introduced myself. My name is Brent Edwards. People call me Moose Legs, Big Sexy, or whatever you want to call me. That's fine with me. But, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the very beautiful Anna Marie Nielsen from OCT, Ontario College of Teachers. Let's give her a nice round of applause, please.
Moving, clicking. Whoa, there's a hole. Okay, we're good. How do you follow the MC? Like, really? He's doing fuzzy wuzzies, and I'm going to come and talk about accreditation and certification. Like, it's not a good follow-up at all. And I also am ADHD, so the idea that I'm going to stand still is unlikely. But the good thing is I'm a teacher, so I can project. And if I need to move around, checking at the back, can y'all hear me? Okay, and maybe I'll use that if I need to. All right, so good morning, everyone. And okay, and then am I going to conflict? Is this better? Does this work? Pretty good? Awesome. I could break into karaoke. That would probably be a lot more fun than what I'm going to talk about right now. All right, I guess, do I just tell you advanced slide? Do I just say next? Okay, thanks. That sounds better too. So good morning. I am Anna Marie Nielsen. I am the Director of Standards of Practice and Accreditation at the Ontario College of Teachers. And one of the things that I'm going to try and dispel is that the Ontario College of Teachers is not a teacher's college. So we are not the Faculty of Education. So one of the things that I want to talk about is what we do, but probably more importantly is what we do not do. We do not fund education. We do not set curriculum. We do not advocate for teachers. That's the unions and the federations. We do serve the public interest, and we serve the safety and well-being of students. And so as a result of that, and I'm assuming they're having troubles advancing the slides, and you know that because the tech crew is all looking around at each other and they're as stressed as maybe I am, but I can actually do this without any visuals. It's just, oh, I am the clicker. Oh, so it was my problem. We're not having a problem at all. It was me. Still not advancing. Do I have to do? There we go. All right. So this is a very large image of Bruce Beardy's illustration of one of our professional standards. So one of the things that the college does do is if we are going to advocate and promote safety and well-being of students, we have standards of practice for the teaching profession, for expectations for teachers, if they are going to be Ontario certified teachers in good standing. Put your hand up if you are an Ontario certified teacher. Oh, and somebody's calling in to let us know that they are also an Ontario certified teacher. So there are essentially 5 aspirational professional standards and 4 very aspirational ethical standards. And to those standards, teachers are held. And this is an illustration of one of the professional standards. The illustration is of the standard of a commitment to ongoing learning. And this is a focused image, and it is illustrated by Bruce Beardy, who is an OG Cree artist and also a member of the college. And in the image, you can see that the educator or that the individual is looking out over the land, and there's the path. And at times the path goes behind the hills. It goes over and on the other side of the escarpment. And you don't always see the whole path. And that is definitely the way in teaching and in learning. You don't see the whole path. And one of the things that you are all committed to by virtue of being at an education conference is that you are trying to take a look on the other side of that hill, take a look on the other side of that escarpment and see what else might be there. And when you engage in ongoing learning, that is when you get an opportunity to learn about different perspectives and maybe learn about what's on the other side of the hill. So hopefully I'm helping to shed a little bit of light on part of that path, and we'll bring some insights to something that you can take back to your own community. All right. So I said these are some of our goals for the day or the morning, and I'm going to probably dispel as much what the Ontario College of Teachers is not as much as who we are and what we do. I was specifically asked by Emma Lee to talk about transitional certificates. So those are certificates that teachers can use as Ontario certified teachers, and that they could bring those certificates with them and be available for employment in your community or in any other publicly funded school in the province. I'm going to talk a little bit about community-based teacher training, and I know we have some people in the room who are involved in that with some of our current providers of professional education. So although the College of Teachers does not offer teacher education programming, we accredit those programs. So we make sure that any program of professional education that is going to be involved in teacher training, and that for whom that teacher training is going to lead to the individuals becoming Ontario certified teachers, that those programs are held to a standard. And that work is called accreditation. So we accredit people, we accredit programs, and then we certify the people. And so we're going to talk a little bit about community-based teacher training. And then I'm going to talk about something that happened just recently at the college, where we have had the opportunity to do a little bit about what Sherry was talking about, which was giving people voice and offering opportunities for people to come and talk to us about what is it that you need. Instead of us trying to fix a problem that we don't have the understanding of the nuances of the program, we were asking communities, and we will continue to ask communities, what are the needs, and how and are we creating barriers, and what barriers are there? Do we work with other relevant and affected people and people in the education space that we also need to be including in the conversation? And I think it's Daryl happened to be with us at the College of Teachers just last week, and he was representing his community, his organization, and bringing that voice. So Daryl had lots of things he could have been doing last week, and we were really, really grateful that we had a moment of his time, and he was able to bring a lens of the specific nuances of his community and organization and school. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and how more of that needs to happen, and how we need to continue to make sure that the problems that we are trying to fix are actually the problems that are being identified by the people who need help, and that we're not creating more barriers. So when we talk about the who does what in education, and I actually brought this flyer when I came in the fall, and I can certainly send them out to anyone who would like to have that. There's a lot of people involved in education. And so understanding that, the Ministry of Education is who sets the curriculum. The Ministry of Education is who provides the funding per pupil in publicly funded schools. And that's a different situation in community schools, of course. There's QACO, which is the agency that is involved in pay grids for teachers. That's not us. There's the Ministry of Colleges and Universities, and they're involved in the funding of faculties of education. So a faculty of education, Queens or Lakehead or Nipissing, they may really want to enroll a lot of people and admit people into their programs, their teacher education programs. But if they don't have the funding from the Ministry of Colleges and Universities, they have a cap on the number of people that they can bring into their programs. That's not us. So it is important to understand that all of those that our ecosystem, that our education ecosystem has all of these different people involved. And one of the things that came out of our Indigenous engagements last week and then the week before was, who are the other people to whom we need to be asking questions? And what would those questions be? And can we broker, as the College of Teachers, can we broker some of those conversations? We may not have the answers, but as soon as we hear the questions, we now have a responsibility to take action on that. You can't sit ignorantly and say, oh, I didn't know. Once you know, you've got to do something about it. And if it isn't in your sphere of influence, then do you know someone in whose sphere of influence it is? And that sort of speaks to what Brent was talking about, the bring your card networking moment. You could find that there might be someone in the room or in your sphere of influence to whom a strategic email or a phone call or a quick text will often get that conversation started. So I just spent a little bit of time talking about what we don't do. And you're probably sitting there going, well, are you actually ever going to get to the part of what you do? And this is an accumulation of essentially the 4 facets of the Ontario College of Teachers. The top 3 Lego pieces are the upstream work. And if we do that really, really well, we endeavor to offset the downstream work, which is discipline at the end. But we are responsible for setting the standards of the profession. As I said, for accrediting the programs of professional education, the programs that teach teachers to teach, teacher training programs, and then the certification of people. So we certify the people who have completed those accredited programs. And I don't want to say that that's a rubber stamp, but it's a very, a relatively easy pathway because they've completed a program that we already know a whole lot about because we've accredited the program. So someone who has graduated from an accredited program in the province of Ontario has quite an easy time, and it doesn't take very long for the certification to happen, for them to become an Ontario certified teacher. But we also certify people who come from other jurisdictions, so from outside of Ontario. And they come through and can become a teacher in Ontario by virtue of labor mobility. That's the same thing as we had an example of an Inuk speaker and an Inuit speaking individual. And they had attended a teacher education program at Nunavut University. And so by virtue of labor mobility, because they were trained in another jurisdiction in our country, they could come and be certified in Ontario. And that's a relatively easy pathway as well. What's a little more difficult is if someone is internationally educated. So if they come from outside of Canada, then we have to find a way that their teacher training compares to our teacher training. And sometimes there are gaps. And so they might be expected to take a course on teaching in the Ontario context, which includes Indigenous perspectives, ways of knowing, because that's very unique to the Ontario teaching ecosystem that they would not have necessarily, well, that they would not have had part of their training in their country. So those 3 top Lego pieces, that's the upstream work. We set the standards and that are aspirational, but attainable for our teachers. We accredit programs that are rigorous, but provide effective teacher training so that the students of Ontario get good teachers in the right programs with good skills and knowledge. And if we certify those teachers, that's the upstream work that we hope will offset any need for discipline if someone does not uphold the standards and does not serve the student safety and well-being. And if they don't, we do not condone that. We discipline. We would remove a certification. We would revoke or reprimand. And so that's the discipline side of things. This is the landscape of the programs that are the faculties that currently have accredited programs in the province of Ontario. So that's all of them. The ones in blue have some type of Indigenous teacher education program. So Trent, University of Ottawa, Queen's, Brock, York, Nipissing, and Lakehead all have some type of accredited Indigenous teacher education program. But that does not mean that the program has to be in Kingston. So Queen's is in Kingston, but Queen's offers community-based programs. So they will go to communities. It's like a roadshow. They take their program that is accredited, that is held to the standards, and they take it to communities. And if there's a certain tipping point of numbers, and we're going to talk about what is it that they look at, or that they need from community in order to bring a pop-up, I'll call it, to the community. They will engage with that, and they have a number. And I know that we have people here who have had programs come to their community. They don't necessarily have to stay all that long, because there's a cohort of people who are uncertified, who are teaching, who are doing the work. The program comes in, they engage in the program, they get those people certified, and then they leave the community, because the major group of people to whom we're requiring certification have received their training. And so they move on to another community where there may be another cohort of folks that need to be, that need to have that. We also have, whoops, I probably slipped through that one too quickly. This is really quick on the draw. No, that's the one. Okay. What I was showing previously was the Indigenous teacher education programs, but there are only, within those blue, there are only 2 providers who offer Indigenous language teacher education programs, and that's Nipissing and Lakehead. And that was primarily what the conversation was for our Indigenous engagements in the last 2 weeks, because those 2 providers, Nipissing and Lakehead, are not producing enough Indigenous language teachers to meet the needs of the entire province. And that is not necessarily the pathway for all Indigenous language speakers. If you are a speaker, it may not be, given your age and stage and connections with, I'm about to take my shoes off, and connections with community, you may not be interested in having to leave your community and go and do a language program at Nipissing and Lakehead. So what is available is not meeting the needs. And that's what the conversations were about, what does a community-based language program look like? Were we to invest resources in accrediting those types of programs, would they actually meet the needs? Or is it better to have an intensive program where there's the language intensives, where they go and do language in an immersion type of setting, and then have some pathway to become an Indigenous language teacher after the fact or as part of it. So making sure that the solutions, or that the barriers, are actually better suited to what community needs. The reason that I want to talk about the 3 different types of programs is because there are different certificates depending on which type of program you are in. And so a concurrent program, like what is offered again, those are the programs where people technically come, right? No undergraduate, no at all. And they do an undergraduate program and their teacher education. Yeah, got it. At the same time. And so that fits a need, but it does require that someone would be leaving their community. So that's not for everyone. Then there are the consecutive programs. So a consecutive program is there is a unique pathway for people of Indigenous ancestry who can access a consecutive program without an undergraduate degree. Others must do an undergraduate degree. So they do their 3 or 4 years of university, and then they go into a teacher training program. That's sort of the typical pathway for non-Indigenous people to gain teacher education. undergraduate degree, either a Bachelor of Arts or Science or whatever it is. And then they carry on and they do the 4 semesters of teacher education and they get their BEd at the end of that. For those of Indigenous ancestry, the ITEP programs, which are consecutive programs, offer a pathway so that you do not need an undergraduate degree. You can access that program, that 4-semester program, without an undergraduate degree. And we have a couple of those programs, and that leads to primary junior certifications, certification in 2 divisions, primary and junior. And they can do that in 4 semesters. So that's very attractive because it recognizes that these folks might not have had an undergraduate degree. And so the time barrier is sort of taken care of with those consecutive programs. What is probably the most flexible and the fastest route, if you will, is the multi-session consecutive program. So again, for those of Indigenous ancestry, they could access that program without an undergraduate degree, as long as it's being offered. So it has to be offered by one of our programs that is accredited. And with that multi-session program, they do a small number of method, like curriculum course, how-to courses, and a small number of foundation courses, like child development or education law. And I swear they're actually advancing on their own. And then they are able, and a 10-day practicum, and then they are able to teach where they are working for employment, and their employment days count as the rest of their practicum. And then they finish their coursework in evenings, in the summer, online, in ways that are easier for them to continue their program. So that pathway is a very flexible and very attractive pathway for people in community, especially if the coursework part of it comes to them and is brought to them from one of our providers. So this is an example of the theme of this conference being about finding solutions for filling the gaps and this idea of passing knowledge. So I reached out to my sphere of influence, which are the faculties of education, to the Queens, the Lakehead, the Nipissings, and said, hey, I'm going to be working and speaking with a group of people from the Anishinaabe Nation, Asking Nations. And they're going to ask me, and I know this gentleman here because he spoke to me in the fall and said, you know, we're doing this program, it's really great. And then lots of people came and talked to me about it. And I said, it's not me who runs the program, but we accredit the programs. And so hearing this interest tells me that I can do some matchmaking. I can do some brokering for you and make sure that you are aware of who can possibly come to community. So when I reached out to the assistant dean or the associate dean at Queen's University, Peter Chin, I said to him, what are the types of questions that you need communities to have talked about within their own community before you start to engage in conversation with them about bringing a program to them? Like, what do you need to have as base information that they can be taking back from this conference, talking about in community, talking about with the people that they need to talk to? And then when they reach out to you, they've already done some of the legwork. They've already had some of these preliminary conversations. And I know there's a lot of text there, but you get the slide deck. So you've got the questions if you want afterwards. But basically he said, in those initial conversations, we want to know about where do you need the program? Where's the location? Is there an opportunity that a few nations could have a central location? In which case the where becomes very important. They need to know about what are the anticipated numbers of possible students that could be recruited. You know, how many people do you already have in community who are teaching in your schools, who have an interest or appetite in becoming certified? And a really big question is, why do you need them certified? You know, are they able to be employed in your schools without being certified? And what's the value added of being certified? I mean, those are really important questions for you to have had conversations about before you sort of engage in the next steps. Funding, money. Do you have any fund? Does the community have any funding support? And what are the limitations for that funding support? Again, these are not my questions to you. These are questions that any of the faculties of education would be wanting to have answered before they would be able to have informed information to give you to come to your community. How long are you thinking that you're going to need this program to take care of the needs of your community? Can we do it in a 4-semester program, like right away? Or is that going to be too much pressure on your teachers? There's no way they can do that because of all of the other demands and expectations that they have in their lives. It's going to actually need to be a little bit longer, or it's going to need to have some flexible options, some part-time options, or some pop-in, pop-out options. So what's the best type of sequence for it? Is there internet access? What are the travel accommodation requirements? So if faculty members come as instructors, where would they be able to stay? Would there be a possibility that if a group came, could they live or be accommodated together? Because certainly there has been evidence that when a group of people come together, either as teacher candidates to do practice teaching or as instructors, if they can come together as a small group, then that starts to form a bit of a professional learning community. And that's good practice. What does it look like in terms of access? Winter roads, fly in. Is there a regional appetite? Like, do people really want this? And are they going to be welcomed, or are they going to be seen as outsiders? And it's not really, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And if there's no problem, then this is probably not the solution. Again, location. It obviously was so important, it was repeated. And what is the infrastructure? Is there space? Even in terms of appetite for a combination of online courses, is this, there would be land-based courses because of the type of learning. What would that look like, and where could that play out? So that would be part of the questions that the Lakeheads, that the Nipissings, that the Queens, that any of the current providers would want to be asking, and some pre-think that community could engage in. Again, in terms of considerations, anyone, I mentioned that it's the Ministry of Colleges and Universities that fund these programs. So they already have a cap of people that they can enroll in their programs. And if they were going to do a community-based program, there wouldn't be additional funding for that. So that would come from grants or off of the essentially the amount of money that the faculty has for their other programs. They would now be shifting and offering this as well. So that's really mitigated if you can have high enrollment. So if you have a lot of people who can be who could be involved in this, that's going to help. Because by virtue of having, 15 to 20 individuals in each year, then that way they can double up the classes, because you would kind of have a year 1 cohort and a year 2 cohort if you were doing it in a 4-semester model. And that can make it cost effective. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. So if you're sitting there going, yeah, we don't have those numbers, forget that. That doesn't mean it couldn't happen. It just means that the funding would have to look differently. It also can work if you have local instructors. So if they don't have to bring in all of the instructors, and nor would they say that that would be the best model. The best model would be leveraging local instructors, bringing in that experience. But of course, if you have more local folks, then the costs for accommodation and travel are significantly lower, and that means that it's an easier funding model. And then he finished it off by saying, but when we can't have local instructors or high enrollment, then financial support is needed. And I know when I was here in the fall, one individual put their hand up and they said, the money is not the problem. And I know everybody else sort of turned and looked and sort of said, well, what color is the sky in your world if money is not the problem? But you may have other funding sources, and that would be something that you could bring to that conversation as well. So again, I'm sharing this just so that you've got this all in one place. It could be part of your conversations. It might invite you to be thinking about other options. And again, this is still leveraging an accreditation process that we already have set in law, in regulation. We don't have to do any changes for this to happen. The conversation that Daryl and the other group of folks who came to the college last week were having was about, what if even this doesn't work for community? If this isn't what you need, and in particular for language speakers, if this is not still not the right or best way for teachers to become, for speakers to become certified. And so we were talking about other elder endorsements. You know, what would it look like if the elder or if the community brought forward candidates and said, you know, we know that these people are speakers, that they have the cultural awareness and knowledge from this community, and we would promote them as being teachers who would be accepted and valued in our community. We currently don't have the regulation that would allow us to say, oh yeah, that's okay, sure, we can put a stamp of approval and say they're an Ontario certified teacher. Yet, we do not yet have that. But these conversations were part of what would we need to have to be able to allow for an elder endorsement model. So this is a bit of an infographic that really talks about that multi-session pathway that I was talking about. So what really has to happen in that program before a candidate could start teaching with a multi-session transitional certificate, so they're a member of the college and they can use their employment days for the rest of their practicum. So all it shows here in very small font is what it is. And this is the same model for tech ed teachers, or as it is for folks who have trade experience, but also folks who have language proficiency, both in French and Indigenous languages. And then again, as I said, folks who come in by virtue of being of Indigenous ancestry. So they come into the program, they complete 12 credits in a combination of method and foundation courses. They complete 10 days where they are the learner in the classroom. So they are actually a student teacher with another teacher supervising them in a classroom. So they actually get a chance to be a learner and see different teaching strategies and decide what's going to work for them and try them out. Then they get awarded the multi-session transitional certificate, and they can now teach. They can now teach as an Ontario certified teacher, and they finish their program. They finish the rest of the credits of their program, as I said, either online or in community or in summers, depending on the nature of the program. And they finish their remaining 70 days of what we call the practicum days, but they're now employed. So they're now earning their wage earning for the completion of their program. And so this is that multi-session pathway. And it is at step 2 where they receive their multi-session transitional certificate. And they now are an Ontario certified teacher with the obligation that they must finish their program and they must finish out those days of practicum, but they can use them as employment days. And that's what happens in step 3. They complete anything that's remaining in their initial teacher education program. And then by step 4, they convert. They convert their certificate, their multi-session, I'll call that as an interim certificate. They convert it to their general certificate, which is what people want at the end. And that's the certificate that Brent was talking about, certified, that indicates being an Ontario certified teacher. So that's that multi-session pathway. The transitional certificate, I know, same word, not quite the same. This is a different certificate, but it is for people who are not in that multi-session pathway, but who are in any consecutive program in the province of Ontario. So anyone who's enrolled in a teacher education program in Ontario not those multi-session ones, because we just talked about what's special and unique for that, but any consecutive program since September 1st, 2023, they are now eligible to be reported for a transitional certificate, basically halfway through their teacher education program. So anyone who's in teacher education program, once they finish about half of their program, which is 30 credits and 40 of their 80 practicum days, they now can be reported by their faculty for a transitional certificate. And they can use the transitional certificate to do supply teaching, to do short-term occasional teaching. And so this means that for communities, there is another pool of teachers who are out there, who are in the province, who are now available for employment. The challenge is they don't have as much time as those people in a multi-session program. They have to finish their program as it was laid out. So they probably are doing their program over 2 years and they are maybe halfway through, but they are eligible for hire. So if you see someone who has a transitional certificate, it's not that it was some make-believe certificate they pulled out of a Cracker Jack box. It is a legitimate certificate from the Ontario College of Teachers. It just means that they are actually a student teacher at the same time. They are still finishing their program. So just to dispel some misconceptions about these different certificates that are out there, it is authentic. It's true. They could be teaching. The only challenge with them, with some of your communities is distance. And could they come and stay and contribute for a length of time when they are still trying to finish their program? The multi-session consecutive folks definitely could, because they can use employment for their practicum days. This would require some creativity and flexibility on your part and on the part of the faculty for them to finish the program. There are also, in addition to that map where I showed the Queens and the Lakehead and the Nipissing that are already programs that are already providers that have accredited programs. Through the Indigenous Institutes Act of 2017, there are a number of Indigenous institutes that could come forward to offer their own Indigenous teacher education programs. First Nation Technological Institute is one of them. And you see the images. Kijentwin Tag is another, and I apologize for my pronunciation. But there are 9 institutes that, were they to proceed through their quality assurance processes through the Indigenous Advanced Education Council, they could become providers just like Queens, just like Trent, just like Brock. And we do know that some of those providers are working towards offering, and those would be Indigenous providers offering programs for Indigenous individuals, and with a very much a focus on Indigenous teacher education. And as I say, FNTI is probably the one that is the furthest along in terms of their own processes that they have to do to bring forward an accredited program. These are some of the questions that Daryl and the group were working with last week. And this was this idea of, if those other programs and possibilities that I just talked about, the ones that are at programs that are in at providers that already have accredited programs, or what we are on the verge of having with the FNTIs, and the ability that an Indigenous provider or an Indigenous institute could offer an Indigenous teacher education program. Like, I can't wait for that to happen. We're doing everything that we can to remove barriers so that can happen. But if those 2 options, which we already have the space in regulation and law, that can happen. If those still are not providing for the needs of your communities, number 1, we need to hear about that. And so that was some of the conversations that we were hearing. And so these were some of the prompts that we were talking about in the last couple of weeks. And it was the idea of, if there was going to be an elder endorsement, it's not going to be the College of Teachers that's going to determine language proficiency. We would never presume to say that we could determine or assess or endorse language proficiency. That has to come from community. So what does it look like if you try to scope that, that in your community, you bring forward a candidate because they have this language, that you deem that their language proficiency is sufficient to teach your children, and that they have the cultural proficiency of your elders or your master Jedis, determine that they have the cultural proficiency to be teachers in your community. Are they okay? Are you okay with them going to other community? Is it a transferable thing? Would you accept people who have been endorsed by elders in another community to come to your community? So as the regulator, those are the questions that we have to ask. But we have to ask the questions of you, because we've got to be making sure that we're addressing the needs that you have. So these were some of the questions that we were talking about. I've shared them with you because you may have input. This is another group to whom we can be asking and inviting those questions. So I've shared these questions in the slide deck because you may have input, and you'll see that the last slide is my contact. And if you have any input from any of the questions or from anything else that I've shared this morning, I certainly invite you to send any messages. I did include a couple of slides that summarize the images. I wanted to bring us back to the standards of the profession. So the ethical standards of our profession, which as we've come to understand with the groups of Indigenous communities with whom we've been working over time, that the idea of care, respect, integrity, and trust, that is woven into the teachings of Indigenous peoples. There is not a disconnect between what the college sets as standards for the teachers of the province of Ontario and what Indigenous peoples believe to be true and important in the integrity of an individual. So there's not a big divide there. And in fact, no divide. And then, as I said, our standards of practice. So these are our professional standards, that as a member of the profession, you must uphold these standards. And number one, if everything else fell away, would still stand. A commitment to students and student learning. That's putting the student at the heart of everything that we're doing. Sherry said it, Brent said it earlier. That is your modus operandi, that is our modus operandi. And so we value the same. That is what is valued. Ongoing professional learning. That's what you're engaged in the next 2 days or 2 or 3 days. And it doesn't start, nor does it end here. You've got a commitment to that. And so too do we expect that of Ontario certified teachers. We also see that everyone is a leader. So within your sphere of influence, how do you enact leading? You can lead by being a really good mentor teacher to a student teacher. You can lead by having a professional learning community within your school. You can lead by having provincial input. You can lead by having agency and coming and sharing community needs. That's all about leading. And then the last two are probably what most people think about as our professional standards. Teachers need to know stuff. They need to know stuff about content, but more importantly, they need to know stuff about learners. So they need to know how to differentiate instruction. They need to know how to fill gaps for kids who have different learning styles, who do not learn traditionally, do not learn by virtue of someone chatting at them, for whom land-based learning would be far more engaging, and they could learn a great deal more about all of the math that is tied to the hunt, or to beading, or tying fish nets. And then, of course, there's professional practice. It's not just what we know, but it's how we do it and how we present ourselves and how we carry ourselves as professionals. And each one of those standards is illustrated in one of the images that the artist Bruce Beardy has for us on the right-hand side. There are also a number of other resources that I included in the slide deck just so that you have one-stop shop. When you think about the College of Teachers, you know that you can go to that slide deck and you've got all the information. I'm not necessarily going to speak to any of them specifically, but I happily would send any hard copies out to you, or they are all available online on our college website, oct.ca. The last slide, I think, says questions, and I'm happy to take questions, but I'm going to pass on to the next slide, which should have my contact information. There I am. A.Nielsen@oct.ca. Just watch the vowels because I'm Danish, so the I's and the E's come around in a different way. And I share that while I take questions, because if you want to take notes or if you want to right now, as Brent did earlier, send me an email right now asking me a question or a compliment. Gladly would take them. But more importantly, I'm always happy to be thinking about the next steps. What do we need next? What or who do I have in my sphere of influence that I should be connecting with you about? And I bring that and I speak that from my heart as I authentically position myself as a co-learner in this. I don't have all the answers, so I'm turning it up to questions, and there's a very good chance I may not be able to answer yours, but I will seek to work on finding the answer with you if I don't have the answer. And with that, I didn't actually see you waving arms and tell me it was time to be done, but I think this is probably a good time to turn it over to questions if there are any.
I got a question. Does OCT have a orientation package for teachers that are heading into First Nation communities?
We do not. We do not.
Want some help?
Yeah. And the reason I say that is because I'm not saying that it isn't something that we could develop, but I think I think where I see a connection for that is we are in the process of updating our standards. And I think there's a connection there with once we have a revisit or an update of the ethical and professional standards, that there's an element there that it might be a springboard for that. So no, we do not yet.
I think me and you should discuss something sometime later today.
Sounds
about
good.
What I just asked.
Sounds good.
But anyways, does anybody else have a question?
Sherry, I see you. That would be, so if you're talking about for teachers for a requirement, so the one we currently have a sexual abuse prevention program that is the most recent required learning that all teachers in the province of Ontario needed to, with whom to engage in order to keep their certification active. That came about by a energy between both the College of Teachers and the Ministry of Education. So how hard would it be on a continuum? I don't know where I would place that, but what would be required would be pressure both through the council, which is the governing body of the College of Teachers, and the Ministry of Education. So we know that Indigenous perspectives, ways of knowing, is now a required element in the accreditation of the initial teacher education program. But certainly one of the things that we heard in the last 2 weeks where there's this group of teachers who are maybe, and I don't want to be ageist, but they've been out of teacher training for a while and maybe missed that learning in their own K-12 learning, if they ever would have gotten it in that day. And they also possibly missed that learning in their initial teacher education training because of the timing of when they did that. So I think that that's a group that might benefit from that. What energies would it take? I think it would take a great deal of, to parallel, it took a great deal of political pressure for that to happen. Doesn't mean it can't happen.